So hello everyone and welcome to The Way to Bee. Today is Friday, the last Friday in July, July 31st, and it's hot outside. Hot in here too. It's 93 degrees in here in my observation hive building, and it's 90 degrees outside. And of course, the observation hive, as we all know, if you've been watching my channel, swarmed out and collected them, put them back in there. And then the new queens have hatched out. There are no more piping, quacking, talking queens. And somebody has to do a mating flight real soon here. So anyway, this is episode number 71. And what else can we talk about? What's going on in the environment? In the environment right now, the things that I see the bees on most frequently. Black-eyed Susans, those are wildflowers, and they're getting pollen from those. White clover, consistent staple. They're all over it right now. Sunflowers, also providing pollen, some nectar. Goldenrod is starting to open. That feels early to me, but that's going to mark a large nectar flow. So if you're new here, this website and YouTube channel is geared towards basic backyard beekeeping, and my questions are relevant to those who are keeping small scale bees in your backyard, non-commercial. Because we can give more attention to fewer hives, and when it's a hobby, you can spend more resources, more time. You get to hang out with your bees. I highly recommend 2 or more colonies in your backyard. My limit has always been 10, but guess what? As of this past week, with the capturing of that last swarm, compliments of this colony right here, which was Bee Weaver Queen, now she's out in another hive. Who knows what this queen's composition is going to be as she does her mating flight and becomes inseminated by several drones. She will come in here and start laying. I expect to see replacement bees popping up within the next 30 days. So some people notice that this hive still looks pretty populated. Looks like there's a lot of bees in there, and that's true, but guess what's going to happen? We need the new queen to make a successful mating flight. Generally, she won't even do that for the first 7 to 9 days because she has to mature sexually, and she also has to mature physically so that she can manage that flight. She's going to fly up to 9 miles away, and she's going to go to a drone congregation area. Will they mate with the drones from their own colony? Nope, they have to find strangers, and that's to maintain genetic diversity, which we all want. Then she'll come back. So now let's say we're up to as far as 2 weeks in. Then she starts laying her eggs. Then how long do we have to wait before we have new bees popping out? 21 days. So that's why I say 30 days, almost at the earliest, you'll start to see brand new pupa hatching out, and we'll have adult worker bees showing up. Notice, no brood at all. There were some very keen-eyed viewers, by the way, and I appreciated that. They spotted the queen several times. I got a video of the queen departing. If you haven't seen the video, watch it yourself. We're going to have to move on here. If you'd like to post a question yourself, please write in the comments section down below. If you're watching the whole series, we're on episode 71. You may have trouble tracking the episodes and which ones you've seen and haven't seen. Well, the solution is just click the like button right down there, and then that little thumbs up will tell you, hey, I've seen that one. So, if you are tempted to give it a thumbs down, hold back on that, wait for a rainstorm, run outside, throw yourself in a puddle, and take a selfie. Now we'll move right along. Thank you for being here. Let's go with the very first question. These questions were submitted over the past week. I can't answer every question. I'm at the point now, I spend, if you can believe it, 2 to 3 hours every morning just answering bee and chicken questions. And it's beyond my ability. A pint can't hold a quart, so I'm answering as many questions as I can, but I have to cut it off somewhere, and I'll try not to talk too much. Somebody else said I talk too much. Somebody else said, hey, could you improve the lighting on your observation hive? And I thought, yeah, sure can. So now we have special lighting just for the observation hive during my chats so that you can look at the bees and see what's going on. I think that's a good idea. So yes, I've added lighting. Let me know what you think of my lighting setup here now. And the first question, jumping right in, Nikki Gores. Let's see. This is my 4th year of beekeeping. I live in Minnesota currently. By the way, let me pause. Fred, where are you? I'm in the northeastern United States, the state of Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. If you go to any northeastern states from the Midwest, you have to pass through this state. You have to pass through Pennsylvania. There's no way around it because it connects Lake Erie to the Atlantic Ocean. That's right. We cut across the whole United States. That's where we are. Agriculture Zone 4, very cold. Except for today, obviously. All right. Currently have 5 colonies. 3 have Italian queens and 2 have Saskatraz queens. I have harvested about 200 pounds of honey so far, and I still have 10 more boxes to harvest next week so I can start treating for mites and feeding for the winter. Last year, when I pulled the last honey supers off the strong colonies and multiple supers, I noticed a massive amount of bees outside that evening as they were being displaced. How would you normally handle the situation? Looking forward to your advice, Nikki Gores. Here's the thing. You got to consider space for the bees. When you open up your hives at the end of the year, and this is Northern Hemisphere, United States specifically, but we're still going strong in summertime now, but when the cold weather hits and we've done our final harvest of the honey, we have to condense the boxes down so that they have a survivable space for winter, a space that they can keep warm and dry and heat with the bodies of bees. So the more bees we have, the better. But when you go to open it up, and this happens to me too, that's why I have these colonies that go right into winter with 4 or 5 boxes on them. Because when you open up those hives to condense them down to that manageable space, you find wall-to-wall bees. Now, you do need to inspect all of your boxes at that point. This will be your last inspection before the weather really turns cold. Why do you do your inspections before the weather really turns cold? That's because the bees need to still have enough heat to work wax, to seal things up with propolis, and to winterize their own boxes. So when you pull them apart and do an inspection and an evaluation, those are 2 different words. You know, it's not critical, but an evaluation of a hive involves a detailed inspection of every single frame, every single box. Sometimes what you'll find at the end of the year is that bottom box, that brood box, might be actually sparsely occupied. So the first thing I would do is inspect all the boxes and make sure that they are indeed at max capacity. If you have wall-to-wall bees, if it's in the middle of the afternoon when most of your foragers should be out, and you have wall-to-wall bees still, you're in a pickle. You can't really condense that because forcing them all to the outside isn't really workable, because what's going to happen on the cold days, they're all going to jam in there, and guess what else they're going to do? They're consuming the resources, so we need to leave enough on for them. So if you end up with a super colony, this is one of the problems. It's not, I'm going to call it a problem, because I don't personally do it. A lot of people force their numbers. A lot of people intentionally overfeed, build up their colonies so they have this massive workforce going into the nectar flow. Then they get this huge nectar flow, and that's what happened here. Harvested about 200 pounds of honey so far, still have 10 more boxes to harvest. Very productive colonies, so we assume that those numbers are high. How did we get to those numbers? If we did it by feeding, stimulating, feeding with pollen substitute and everything else to boost the numbers, now we have an unnatural number of bees going into the late fall. Because they didn't raise their numbers and decrease their numbers in accordance with the natural rhythm of the environment around them, we stimulated them with extra feed and resources. So now we have to deal with these extra bees. So you can't just shove them all out. One thing you could do, but you can't do it at the end of the year. If this were happening at the beginning of the year, you could make a split and make use of all those extra workers. At the end of the year, you really can't make a split because nobody's making drones, and you need the drones so they can mate. You could make a split and fly a queen in, but then here's the other thing. As the late season arrives, we're making winter bees. Those are the bees that are going to be the workers that are going to sustain your hive throughout the winter. So we need everything strong, healthy, vibrant. We need the queen to be laying strong. We need all the nurse bees we can get because they need to be nourishing those larvae as they develop so that you have strong, fat bees. These bees going into winter that we call winter bees are so fat. How fat are they? They have fat stored in their abdomens. No great surprise, just like people. They have fat stored in their thorax. They have fat stored in their heads. That's right. Yeah. How did they know that? Because they dissected them and looked at the comparison. Winter bees, fall workers, how much fat do they have? Where is it stored? Thorax, abdomen, head. Those are fat bees. And they do no work. They don't forage. So that's, there's a lot going on at the end of the year. So I say, don't pull everything apart until their numbers start to decrease on their own, because they're going to, because the queen's going to cut back on her laying. And then we condense the boxes. That's what I do to handle the situation. And if they don't diminish in numbers enough, I leave several boxes on to go right into winter. Doesn't hurt. Then, when you get into spring and you have the surplus, because they all condense in and left you with a bunch of frames still full of honey, because they're going to rise up through the center and they're going to leave a bunch of frames in the outskirts there that are still capped full of honey and ready for you to harvest. So take it off in spring after they've passed that safety net of getting through winter, because you really don't want to have to feed them through winter. That's what I would do. I hope that's somewhat helpful. And I'm going to talk about, at the very end of this, what's going on with bees right now and cautionary tales, things to watch out for. Gastor, this must be Anthony Gastor, last name first, first name last. Hey, Mr. Fred, I'm a local beekeeper in Tanzania, East Africa. Cool. From all over the world. Cool. Previously, I was hanging local, customized, traditional beehives on the trees. They do that because they're trying to keep their bees away from a lot of predators. But now I have transformed to horizontal beehives and set them on the bench. My difficulties or curiosity is, will it be easy for the bees to transfer to those empty new hives, horizontal, on themselves, since there's one traditional hive next to them with bees so as to attract the other bees? Or do I have to hang their traditional hives as catching traps for swarms and transfer them to new hives? Okay, when you're changing hive configurations, and it's really cool that we're getting a question from Tanzania. But anyway, when we're changing hive configurations, and sometimes this happens even when you're swapping out old equipment, you want to put in new stuff. If you're going to put it in exactly the same spot that the last box was, but keep in mind we're going from suspended hives from trees to a stationary hive that's supported now on the ground on a bench because it's a horizontal hive. So you can remove all of the frames from your existing hive and put them all with the bees in the new horizontal hive in its new location. There will be a lot of bees that will, those that fly, those that are foragers and guards and everything else that know where they live, will attempt to fly back to the original spot. So what you would have to do is continually leave, you can remove the box and leave them nothing to go into and hope that they just follow pheromones and find their new location. Or you can leave your old box in the old location, and as those foragers gather, you can collect them and constantly assign them to your new hive. Now, because it's a horizontal hive, the configuration is different. If this were a vertical hive configuration like the Langstroth standard hive, we would take, once we set them all up in the new location, just take the residue of the old box and put it on top of your new box. The other option here says, what if could I catch them as swarm traps and then install them? If you collect swarms and you install those, swarms were already on the go. So that is a good way to go ahead and occupy a new box. But man, if they're really close together, if it's in the same apiary, you're just going to have a problem with them constantly going back. You may end up keeping the existing box that hangs there and let them do a split. Once you move all the frames into that new horizontal hive, then the foragers and stuff that go back to the old one, you can go ahead and start another colony there. And but then you kind of repeat the same problem if you're really trying to get rid of that. Another option is just to add the horizontal hive, leave that hanging hive until it does go through its normal life cycle. But what should we do? That's a hard question to answer. I personally would transfer all of the bees into my horizontal hive and get rid of that hanging hive altogether, if that's what you want to do and commit exclusively to horizontal hives. I change out equipment, and what I do is I bring all the new hive equipment up right next to the existing hive, pull all the frames out of the existing hive, put them all in the new equipment, and swap it on the spot. But now we're in the exact same specific location. We just have a new box. All the old frames and stuff are in it, which is what they're drawn to. So I'm sorry if that's not super helpful, but I would pull every frame out of the old box, put it in the new horizontal hive. If it's a Langstroth hive, horizontal long lang, it's going to accept the same size frames and everything, and go from there. Eliminate the old box. You'll be bringing any existing brood, nurses, all the bees that can't fly will be in there. Give them resources because you're starting them over in a new box, and then remove the old box altogether. If somebody else has an idea on how to accomplish that, please write it down in the comment section below. The other thing is, I really enjoy when someone posts a question, because let's be honest, I can't keep up with them anymore, though I may try. I like when you're answering each other's questions, and sometimes I pop in there and just put a heart and a uptick on the answer that I like that somebody gave. So responding to one another is super helpful. It's a great community. We don't have a lot of people that are tearing into each other and putting each other down, and I like that. So if you know the answer to something and someone posts down in the comment section, please feel free. It doesn't, it's not like where we think you're being discourteous or that you're getting in front of me and answering someone's question. I welcome your answers. I welcome your links to videos that answer questions and things like that, including referencing other bee sites. Go ahead. Completely fine. Next one is Mahita Rourke. This is my first year beekeeping, and I went big by designing a horizontal hive in April. I have 35 frames, and they are all full. 35 full frames in a new horizontal hive is amazing. That's astonishing work for those bees, because the standard is a strong colony of bees, a normal sized colony of bees, will only draw out the comb on 20 full frames through a season. So that's kind of their max comb wax production limit. And now here we have 35 frames. So I'm curious, if you'd like to comment down below, did you have pre-drawn comb in those frames? Or did they draw this out as foundationless? And what was the production also? What kind of bees did you have? Anyway, they're all full, and my design was to add a flow hive to the top of the horizontal next year. Is the season too short to add flow hives this year, or should I add a super? Yes, I know, it sounds crazy to add a flow to a horizontal hive, but I love both designs. Thanks for all you do, Ricky Rourke. Oh, and at the top it said Mahiti, but the closeout here is Ricky. Okay, so here's the thing. I get asked this question so often, I don't even know what to say anymore. My personal approach to this is, if it's a horizontal hive, leave it horizontal and manage it as a horizontal hive. If you want to do vertical hives, and if you want to use flow supers and things like that from the flow hive, then use the vertical configuration. I would prefer to do both. If you have the physical ability to lift the boxes, that's why you're adding the vertical boxes to the horizontal hive, which is not a perfect adaptation of that horizontal hive. They're designed to stay horizontal. Now we've got this modular, oh wait, I did a drawing. So this is a standard horizontal hive. This is my long Langstroth hive design. And most of them are designed to handle about 32 frames. Now, if this were my horizontal hive, we wouldn't be at the limit yet, because I made my horizontal hive 5 feet long. Let's move on. So 32 frames, and this box is full. So the proposal is to add a flow super. That's what that is right there with the little roof. Bump it up. Now we're starting to look like a split level house, so to speak. And then the normal configuration for flow hives is this flow hive, which has the really nice flow hive tube base, adjustable feet. You get a brood box, you get your honey super. That's a flow hive. Now we want to combine the two. I think that this combination of horizontal and vertical boxes is not awesome. I know people are doing it, and they want the best of both worlds. They want a static horizontal hive, and then they want to add the verticals. And the bees, in some cases, let's be honest, they're using them. So this is going to be personal preference. My personal preference is to leave the horizontal hives a single level, full length, ranch style hive. If you have to have the split level, modern, multi-level hive and you want to put the horizontal and the verticals, good for you. I won't be doing it. I have vertical hives, Langstroth, flow hives, standard horizontal, long Langstroth hive. That's the end, and of course it's observation hive. Those are the styles of hives that I keep. I will not be doing anything like this. And keep in mind too, I wrote a little note up here, tilt with a question mark. When you add those flow supers, you must be able to tilt that back 2 to 3 degrees when you're harvesting your honey. So that to me looks complicated, kind of messy, but that's my advice. Either have horizontal or vertical, or do both separately. Here's the next one. Kellyman 98. This might be a dumb question, as I have no idea about bees at all, but I love the videos. But would it not just cause a problem having so many different hives near each other? It can be, but what's the problem? Look, I did a drawing. Most commercial operations would be represented by these boxes in a row at the top there. They are generally all painted the same color. They have the same configuration, same landing boards, same entrance reducers, same covers, same supers. Often they're all painted white or some other color that identifies that particular commercial beekeeper. Next is, now is that a problem? It can be, because there's bee drift, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Now if you're a backyard beekeeper, indicated down here, we can take advantage of all the things that help the bees orient to their hive. So one thing is, we change the configuration of the hive. We change the location of the entrance reducer. We change the height of the landing board. By the way, I'm always amazed when I see people that have beehives that are sitting flat on the ground. To me, that invites mice, raccoons, everything that feeds on bees, especially skunks where I live. If we sat it on the ground, they'd be invaded by everything. I'm a big fan of elevating them. So having your landing board and entrance at various heights help your bees orient to a specific hive. The other thing is, change the physical traits of the hive. These are my hive visors, which provide shade. By putting those hive visors at different heights and making those different colors can help your bees orient. Patterns, these very strong black and white, high contrast, geometric patterns help the bees orient to very specific hives once they get in close. Then they get on the landing board and they smell the pheromone of that hive, they find the queen and they go in there. The other thing is the colors of your boxes. Change them, have a juxtaposition of color, have landmarks. Putting them next to a tree helps those foragers find home faster. Putting them next to a bluebird box over here. Bluebirds don't eat bees. They'll see that. That's a landmark that they live in this hive. So it helps them get to their hive quicker. Now let's go back to the commercial hives up here. All in a row. You see these in a lot of bee yards. We'll see 3, 4, 5, 6, and more rows of hives that all look the same. Now what's bee drift? Here comes your foraging bee. She's been out all afternoon. She's got her load of pollen. She's got her load of nectar. She's lumbering in. Slow motion videos show how hard it is for them. She actually lives here. But what happens? She flies in here, gets tired, and lands on this landing board because it just happens to be nearby. Well, shouldn't the guards kick her out of this hive when she lands on the landing board? Heck no. She's got pollen and resources. Come on in. So next thing you know, you get a higher population on these end colonies as the bees drift when they come in and they land on another hive and they get invited in. And then you have lowered populations, this is very generally speaking, on these interior hives. So yeah, it's harder for the bees. But we're backyard beekeepers. We don't care about our stuff all looking the same. Even whether you put straps around your hives or you put bricks on top. Bricks on top, another configuration change, another landmark for the bees to home in on. So the more unique you make your hives look, and I highly recommend, by the way, if you're living in the northeastern United States or in the north, any place where you have skunks, I have decided that 17 to 18 inches off the ground is the sweet spot for avoiding skunks that jump up and eat your bees at night. So lower than that, and I still have some hives that are too low and the skunks can still access them. That's a problem. That's my fault. I'm creating shims and as those hives get refurbished and improved and things like that, I'm elevating them even more. So that's my answer to that. This one is Brent Palmdale, California. Oh, I'm sorry, Brent from Palmdale, California. Not a beekeeper yet, but I'm certainly intrigued by the concept. The question I had was, would having thermal insulation outside of the hive be a viable solution for people in colder climates to keep their bees through winter? Could this possibly confuse the bees and throw them off their biological balance, sort of speaking, by making them think it's warmer when it really is warmer than it really is outside? Or do you feel like it's not worth it and to let nature sort them out? If they can survive winter, then they're doomed to fail. Okay, so this comes into bee management, what works for you through the years, and what other beekeepers where you live are doing to get their bees through the winter. That's important information. The kind of bees that you have, are they suited to the climate that you're in? I have not insulated any part of my hives except the roof. If you're going to insulate something, insulate the cover, the telescoping cover. And I'm going to send you again, I often send people to Vinofarm, Vinofarm. If you want to see insulation practices, he lives in a northern area, worse than where I live. And he wraps his hives and he uses different hive top boxes that are insulated even further while venting. So you can check into Vinofarm on that. The other person that I want to take you to is, and I'm going to reference him even later, but Canadian Beekeepers blog, he puts bees in buildings. So you can put your bees in a building, you can insulate your hives. I leave my hives out. They get sheltered somewhat from the wind. This is supposed to be a drawing of snow banking up against the hives, which provides a windbreak and insulation through winter. Bees can insulate themselves. What they can't do when winter hits is seal up any gaps or vents or openings in their hive anymore. So this falls into the earlier question where we're going to reconfigure hives going into fall and winter. If you do not have enough warm days after you've pulled apart the hives, the bees cannot seal up their joints anymore. So you need to come up with a way to do that for them if you're pulling things all apart. Because if there's a lot of venting going on through the top of the hive, the bees are trying to, they form a cluster, and it's called the bee crust on the cluster, which is the outside. The older bees are all physically tightened up next to each other, and they use their body warmth to generate heat, and their physical bodies also insulate, so they're actively generating heat, and they're physically insulating by trapping air, using their bodies layer by layer by layer by layer, all the way into the middle where some winter brood is kept, and where the queen is kept safe from freezing, potentially killing temperatures. So the number one enemy, just like for chickens, the number one enemy is a draft. The air goes through, that's something now that they have to contend with. Now, if the hive is draft free, that's why over the past couple of years, I'm no longer venting through the top of my hives. I leave the venting through the bottom. So wide open venting through the bottom in wintertime is much better than, in my opinion, my practices. You can do anything you want. Find out what your local people are doing and what the successes are. Find people that are giving you honest stories about their successes through winter. Anyway, the moisture and humidity can drain through the bottom just fine. What you find out, and because we have the advantage of this observation hive, I can see how moisture gets managed. The whole top section of this hive has zero condensation in it. Why? Because there are no vents or openings up through the top. There are 1.5 inch diameter screens on each side up here. They're sealed solid. The bees can't use them. Here they are. I even pulled them and changed them out. That is full of propolis. So I thought, well, maybe they want to change that now because it's been through the winter and they have a new year. So I put new screens in there, and what did they do? They sealed them right back up. So this colony's venting is through the bottom, only through the entrance, just like wild bees. So these practices are very different, but if there's venting through the top, they're going to lose some of that valuable heat that they keep up here. So this whole upper half is warm enough that it never gets cold enough to condense, hit the dew point, and cause condensation on the sides, or worse, above them. This is why I said early on, if you can insulate any part of your hive, make sure it's the top box, the cover. That should be insulated because that's where they're going to create that valuable heat envelope, and they're going to preserve themselves, and that's where that spring brood is going to come from. and then they're going to move down later. Also on warm days in wintertime, they can move around. So the whole idea is, should you super insulate? This depends on where you live. If I were living up where Vino Farm lives and has his web channel and everything, based on the temperatures that he reports, I would be doing some insulating. I definitely would. But my hives, it's the thickness of the box, the number of bees going into winter, and so it goes. And you will find out quickly, not all bee lines, bee races will survive the same through winter. If you've got warm climate bee races, Italians and things like that, and in fact there's a basic rule of thumb when you're just looking at the bees, if you don't know their origin, the darker bees are generally made for colder climates, and then the lighter colored bees, those golden bees and everything, are really for the warmer climates. So right now my cold weather bees are the Saskatraz bees, and bee weaver, even though they come from Texas, those bees manage very well up here. But what just happened? They swarmed. I let them swarm, I let them interbreed with local bees, and then I get really good winter stock. We'll talk more about that later. So for me, it's environmental, good boxes, no top vents for me. Some people will use top vents. This is a polarizing thing among beekeepers, which I'm happy to talk about anything, but this is my 14th winter, and I'm getting my bees through, and it also depends on what they die from. We'll talk about that later too. So that's it. Find out what your local beekeepers are doing, see if they're insulating, talk to the people that you know are honest. Because, see, pride gets in the way, and people tend to say that things survived or made it when maybe they didn't. So, or how they get them through. I don't know why that is. Why wouldn't you just admit that, well, I lost 50% of my hives, or I lost all my hives this year. Here's what I think happened when I opened them. Everything was soaking wet, which also is not necessarily a tell. When you've got a dead out in spring and you open up that hive, and if there's a bunch of moisture in there, well, the moisture condensed in there anyway. It may have actually condensed in there after your bees died. So when you find a cluster of bees in the corner and they're small and they're soaking wet, it doesn't mean that they died from the wet. It can mean that they died, and then because they're dead and can no longer heat and circulate air in the space, that's why there was moisture on them. Because even in storage, if you've put out honey supers that were full of honey and they go into storage, you'll even find those, as the exterior warms up, the interior gets condensation on it, because honey that is stored is like a heat or cold battery. It holds those temperatures. Warm air comes in, condenses on that, and yes, in the absence of bees, your honey can take on moisture right through the cappings. Story for another time. But a healthy colony of bees in a good box that's sealed, that they can configure themselves, will generally make it. We're going to move right on. LC. Fred, what time of day would you open the observation hive? Mine is in the kitchen, and of course, when I take it out to open, some bees fly out and don't always seem to find their way back to the window opening. Need to make some adjustments for the homemade hive and with some inaccessible debris and so on. So here's the thing. Observation hives are impractical. They're really kind of terrible, to be honest. In order to get into this, you have to pull off one or both of the glass panels. There are glass panels on both sides of this thing. And it also is tough, like say you wanted to install a swarm in there. You have to pull everything off, put a swarm in, you got this huge open space, and then you have to close it back up. So let's say you had to install a queen that went queenless, no evidence of brood. Now you have to stick it in through one of the 1.5-inch diameter holes. I even had to reshape this queen cage so it would fit through the hole, and I had to use really long tongs, and then once the queen was free, I had to pull that out of there. So observation hives are rough, but they're designed to be inside your house. This one is inside a bee building, which is not even heated. So if it's inside your house, you're in a pickle. You can't just sit in your house and open that thing up. So I drew a little sketch, which may be difficult to interpret. So what are we going to do? You're going to take your observation hive outside. This works with any hive that you're going to really take apart anyway. I recommend laying a white sheet on the ground underneath where the hive is going to be. You've got this entrance into your house right here. Mine has an outdoor small landing that's white, made out of plastiwood, a mix of recycled milk bottles and wood. Anyway, you clip your sheet onto that landing board. Now you open this up, you dump all your bees out onto that, you do the work that you need to do, you clean your glass, you scrape out the debris, you do everything else, put the frames back in, button this thing back up, take it inside your house, and reinstall it. Now, you've got a bunch of bees. Some fly on their own. That's what these little ziggy lines are for. They fly on their own. They go right into that opening. They know where they live. They're the foragers. They're the guards. They've been outside before. They know what's going on. The ones that end up piled on the sheet there that don't seem to know where to go, is just like if you're doing a sugar roll and you dump a bunch of bees off of your brood frames, you dump them into a bucket, a bunch of them fly out and go right back to the hive. That's okay. We don't care about those anyway. You know why? Those are foragers. They know where they live. Those are not the ones that generally have the varroa all over them. So it's the nurse bees, because they're in contact with the brood. That's where varroa destructor mites go. But the philosophy is the same as with this observation hive. When they're dumped out in a bucket, they don't know where they live. They've never been outside before, so they just sit there. So now these are the bees that you scoop up and sugar roll and do your tests and counts for mites on. The other thing is, how do we get them back inside the hive? Well, this is an observation hive. It's all buttoned up, and now there's just a tube connecting it. So this sheet that they're on gets clipped right to that landing board, and eventually these little nurse bees and bees that have never been outside of the hive will follow that up and go in the hole. Now, if there's no physical connection like that to that entrance hole, they may just stay in place for an undetermined amount of time and just die of exposure. Nurse bees have not been outside. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what to do. And it's your job to create a physical bridge to get them back inside that hive. Try it. It works. It's pretty cool. Because we had a bunch of bees laying in a pile before when people took apart a hive. And they were just laying there. They weren't going to go back in the hive. And I said that's because we had to physically connect them with the entrance. They could smell the pheromones. They can follow it in. We did that. They all started marching in. Had we not done that, they would have sat in their tub and just died. I think they were in a wheelbarrow or something, because we dumped a bunch of them out. That's the answer for that. Dump them on a sheet. Get them back in. Question number 7. Ken King, Little Rock, Arkansas. Did I mention that it's 93 degrees in here? Nothing like a hot cup of coffee when it's 93 degrees. Anyway, my question is, last week during my hive inspection, I saw 2 queen cabs in my hive. I think he meant to say queen cups. I left them alone and did not disturb them. This week I noticed they're gone. I know that sometimes bees make queen caps for practice, but do they typically destroy them? Thank you, Ken. Made a little drawing. This is a brood frame, expertly rendered here, and at the bottom of it, and sometimes even up in the field, you'll see something that looks like the cap of an acorn. These are called queen cups, and they're usually slightly inverted, and when you look inside of them, there's nothing there. Are those bees making preparations to swarm and get out of there? No. It is a normal configuration inside the hive to find queen cups stuck around. Usually it's just 1 or 2, and they're empty. When does a queen cup become a queen cell? When the queen lays an egg in it. Then it's a queen cell. Until then, it's just insurance. Now, to answer this question, would the bees tear those down and just get rid of them? Sure they would, because they use the wax elsewhere on that same frame. Sometimes when you have, as we have recently, we had multiple queen cells in here. Once they're done, the bees will chew apart those queen cells and recycle the wax into cappings and other things. So they'll work up their frames with them or just glom it together. That was the first time years ago that I realized how much bees are reusing wax, because I've also seen wax caps come off and seen them drop to the bottom of a hive, and just seen foragers or workers, undertaker bees, pick up those bits and pieces and fly them right out and get rid of them. So I thought, whoa, they're not even reusing the wax. What a waste of resources. But then a queen hatched out, popped that little top off. Queen cell was aiming down, top was hanging. They chewed off a big chunk of that, and I watched the bees because I'm very busy and I did not have the time to sit there for 3 hours with a cup of coffee and stare at them while they played with their wax. And I saw them tear off the side of it and stick it onto the adjacent frame comb. So they were actually saving and recycling the wax. So yeah, they build it up, they tear them down. Sometimes they build a partial queen cell. If it doesn't work out, if it's not viable, if something happens to that larva that's in there, they chew that apart and just get rid of it. They clean it out. And then they make a new cup, and then they can make another queen later if they want to. But yeah, it's totally in flux, and yes, they tear them down as well as make them. The presence of a queen cup on your frame, again, I'll just reinforce it, doesn't mean that they're making preparations to get out of there. It just means they made preparations. That's kind of an insurance policy. If things start going bad, they'll get the queen to lay an egg in there. They'll develop another queen. Next one here, Russ Bragg from Lechley, Lincolnshire, England. Man, I hope I said that right, Lechley. Hi Fred, I'm enjoying your videos, very informative. I noticed on your latest video you mentioned the Bee Scanner app. Is there any chance you would be doing more about this app as it looks very promising? Thank you, Russ. Well, it's called Bee Scanning app. You can see it in my most recent horizontal hive, my long Langstroth hive. I'll put a link to that down there. Because I just like to fool with it and see if this digital app works. It's designed to, again, take pictures of your brood frames with the workers on it. Can you or should you consider your hive clear and free of varroa mites if the app fails to show varroa? It counts the bees, it finds anomalies in the bees, and identifies little specks that have the color and approximate size of varroa destructor. So I even tested it on this, and sometimes if a bee was underside facing out, it would indicate the tongue as a varroa destructor mite. So it was not 100% accurate, but if there's a mite physical and visible on these bees, would it find it? It sure does. So when it finds mites and indicates that it's a mite, and you look it over, because you get these little white boxes on the pictures so you can examine the bees up close, it's pretty darn good at picking the mites. Most hives you would not see the underside of a bee, so it works pretty good. But can you consider your hive free and clear because it did not find mites? No. But I use it as a tool in this regard, because somebody criticized me. I don't think they paid attention to what I was saying. Because I said, if it shows a high mite load, I wouldn't bother going on with a sugar shake or an alcohol wash to find out if it's loaded with mites, because you look at the pictures right there, you see the mites, and you have a mite load. That tells you right then, whoa, you're in trouble, you need to treat this hive. So yeah, then that's your threshold for treating. But if they're clear, it does not mean that the hive is completely clear. I would still do a count. But if it's loaded, heck yeah, treat right then. I wouldn't play games. I've started a satellite apiary about 15 miles north of me. We found a completely loaded colony. It was from a swarm. And that app identified a whole bunch of mites, and we looked at it, and sure enough, there were mites on them. And I wish I'd been using that app earlier, because that is immediate. You take a picture of it, you see the mite right away, you can take action right away. Taking a colony apart, pulling the frames, and doing sugar shakes and all of that, alcohol washes, whatever your preference is, that's time consuming. The app will identify a loaded colony pretty fast. It just, you can't consider them clear when it doesn't. But if you find them and they're loaded right away, so if you had an assistant, even if you're a commercial beekeeper, you send that assistant on ahead or whatever, and they photograph a bunch of the frames and the most loaded frames with, you know, your nurse bees, and they find mite loads, mark that hive for treatment, mark that hive for treatment. You just save the time of sugar rolls, you just save the time of having to do an alcohol wash, because you know they're loaded, you know that you can see those pictures, and it logs and saves the pictures for future reference. And it also, because you put hive identification numbers in there, it will tell you trends, like what was my most infected colony, this one, what was my least infected colony, that one over there. So it saves everything. You name the apiary, you give your hive numbers and whatever identifying characteristics you have for them, and you go from there. So I'm still evaluating it. It's bee scanning, if you want to look that up, or there's a link in that website. I might put a link down below on this one. But I think it looks promising. But the thing that we're doing is the company that is working on the software, they're improving it. So with all of the pictures that we submit, when you join it, and it's free right now, it used to cost money, I understand. It's free. So anyway, when you join it, every time you contribute pictures and there are false markings or good markings, that helps them better refine the app for future updates. So that thing is going to be a very valuable tool for identifying hives that require immediate attention and treatment if you're the kind of beekeeper that treats your bees. So here's the next one. It's from Ray Davis. Hi Fred, my name's Ray Davis. I live near Rainier, Oregon. We're about 50 miles from the Pacific Ocean, about 800 feet elevation. Last winter I built 2 long Langstroth boxes, and they have plexiglass inspection boards on the sides and screen bottoms with trays underneath with mineral oil in them. I got 2 nukes. Nukes are short for nucleus packages. That means they come with frames that have eggs and brood and a laying queen and everything else. They're a complete tiny colony of bees. April 11th, and through my local bee club, my bees are in a building with their exit to the outside. One of the hives swarmed in late June but seems to have recovered really well. The other hive has about 24 frames in the main body, and I have 2 medium supers on top. So this goes back to the other one. We have a horizontal hive. Those frames are pretty much full, and then they stacked medium supers on top of that. One of the medium supers is completely full, the other is close. On the hive that swarmed, I have 22 frames, and 17 frames out of 22 are full. I have 2 medium supers on that one. So all these horizontal configurations have boxes vertical stacked on them. I started watching your show about a month ago and realized I've made some mistakes in the past. Being a new beekeeper, about 4 days ago, I ordered a flow hive. Not quite sure how long it will take to get here. Should I put it on? Or when I get it, or wait until next year? I have enclosed 2 pictures, which might help really enjoy my setup. Okay, so here's the thing. Somebody else that wants to add a flow hive on top of the horizontal format. So if you wanted it, it's personal preference, but we're defeating the whole idea. Here's the other thing. The horizontal hives, we hear this discussion, it's almost full, 32 frames, whatever. I recommend, because 32 frames were what was put out, that's what size your hive should be, because that's the max that the bees will do. I made mine much longer than that, because what's wrong with adding more space, and you close it up with a follower board anyway, which makes the bees think the hive is this big, when in reality it's this big. So my horizontal hive is big enough for many more frames. So I wouldn't have to be putting vertical boxes because my horizontal hive met its capacity. So I can infinitely expand it without stacking boxes. The other thing is, if it gets that big and that full, it's time to make a split. But now we're in the late season. We're near the end of the year. People have troubles getting their flow hives, the flow supers, to be worked by the bees even through the summer. You need a strong workforce. We need the heat. We need the nectar coming in so that they can make fresh comb, seal those frames up, seal all the joints because the thing has to move. And so when it's in its closed position, the cells are complete, the bees have to seal up all those joints. And that's the bulk of the work in the beginning of the year. So now we're near the end of the year. I would say it's too late to expect a harvest from your flow super. But if you've got extra space and you want to put that on there and let the bees start the work, let those bees start sealing up those joints, prepping it for next year. Then when you get near the end of the season, you pull that off, leaving them again plenty of time to seal up all the joints and crevices and everything else after you've pulled things apart while it's still warm enough, and shelf that flow super, which now has been worked on. So in the spring, when your next big nectar flow is about to come on and you put that thing on your strong colony, they'll have less work to do. So that's my opinion on that. I would put it on, let them work it a little bit, take it off, put it in storage, put it on in the spring. Sand Pirates. Evening, Mr. Dunn. What are your thoughts on placing a hive inside a shed? I see your observation hive is inside your man cave shed, and it seems very strong. It is. It's in here, and it goes through winter. I also live in the snow belt, northeast Ohio. I want to ensure when I start beekeeping, the bees have the very best to survive and grow. I'm planning on horizontal hives staged inside a 20-foot connex to give a total of 10 hives. I can design and build my horizontal hives to accept flow frames. I'm currently deployed overseas, and so on. Well, I'm going to take you right back to if those who are looking into horizontal hives, horizontalhives.com, Dr. Leo Sharishkin, please check it out. Also, before you invest all the money in getting a horizontal hive and everything, don't just watch my videos. Go ahead and get the book called Beekeeping with a Smile. It's full of philosophies and wonderful things about keeping bees. They only inspect their beehives twice a year, unless there's something obviously wrong with it. And so there's a whole philosophy shift there in the way Dr. Leo manages bees. And I'm going to send you to the Beekeeper's blog again. And that's because when you put things in a building, and you're going to put a lot of hives in there, depending on the size of the building, bees respirate, so they need an exchange of air. So you're going to have to vent that building, maybe even have to move the air with huge fans, the way Canadian Beekeeper's blog does. The other thing I want you to know about is whenever you're accessing hives inside a big building like that, you get free-flying bees in there. They fly towards the lights, they fly towards the door, they fly towards windows. I highly recommend you get the hopper-style windows. What's a hopper-style window? Hopper-style windows, anchor at the bottom, tilt out. You can find them Anderson basement windows. I have a bunch of them. I have a great big hopper window in a box right over here. Why? Because I'm going to put it in this building. Why am I doing that? Because I'm going to put other hive configurations inside this building, and I'm going to tend them right in here. So when I open it, if any of them fly up, they would go to the windows, which I have window blackout boards for, and then the only source of light in here, when we turn all these lights out, will be that hopper window. If it's a regular glass window, the bees are going to collect on it. They can't get out. If it's a sash window, you pull the lower sash, they're collected on the top, they won't go out. If it's a hopper style, it flips out, the bees hit the window, follow it up and out, and then they come back in through the opening, the entrances. Hopper style windows. That's one thing I want you to remember. But if you want to know about keeping them in buildings, Canadian Beekeeper's blog, he keeps his hives in buildings. It's a big commercial operation, but he's one of those guys that shows you what works and what doesn't. He is doing wheelbarrows of dead bees, scooping them out of that building. The other thing is, when you put them in a building, if that's on a concrete slab or something, make sure your hives are elevated. Make sure there's ventilation all the way around those hives. Because they are generating moisture themselves. Their bodies are generating moisture. They're respirating. And there's condensation wherever that dew point is hit. So the other thing is, he has very good information about the optimum temperature in winter to keep those bees okay. But I have problems with condensation in buildings that aren't well vented in the wintertime. Ever go out in your garage when you've got one of those warm-up days and it's been wicked cold through the night and the concrete slab is basically wet? There's a lot of condensation that occurs when outside it gets really warm and inside doesn't catch up very fast, and you have masses like concrete and part of the structure that cause condensation and slippery conditions. So, I'm sorry, I have to refer people to those people who have been doing that for many seasons. This is from Rose Robertson. This is my first year at this, and I've fallen in love with the incredible girls. I built a horizontal Langstroth per horizontalhive.com. That's Dr. Leo Sharishkin. And installed a nucleus colony of bees in May. I live in Central Washington, State Zone 6. So when they say zones, these are agricultural zones. Look up agricultural zones to understand what the temperature parameters are for those areas. I was thrilled to see that you built your own horizontal hive and are seeing what happens with it. Question. First, when using OA vaporization with this hive, OA is oxalic acid, common treatment for the Varroa destructor mite. I have wondered, given its horizontal configuration, whether I need to move the wand laterally to at least to 2 positions to get better coverage. Secondly, I have a screened bottom board with solid bottom below and sticky tray between. When vaporizing, I have noted crystals, very fluffy, built up on the screen, right above the wand. Does that mean that the full effect is not occurring up into the frames? I would think the same thing would occur on the bottom of the frames inserted through the entrance. No? Here's the thing about oxalic acid vaporization, which is what we're talking about. It's a vaporization delivery method. That's something I started doing last year. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute because I have another question relevant to it. When you put the vaporization into the hive, it makes no difference if it's at the bottom, if it's at the top, if it's from the side, because the vapor goes everywhere. How do I know that? Because I videoed it and I showed, number one, what the bee's reaction is to it. Number two, how well it permeates throughout the hive. Even though the bees immediately start fanning and trying to get rid of it, that fanning that the bees do actually causes it to circulate into every little nook and cranny in the hive. It does not penetrate capped brood and things like that, even though that is considered gas permeable because the bees are off gassing as they're in the pupa stage. But enough oxalic acid vapor does not get there. Now the whole point of it is for it to condensate and to settle on surfaces. That's how it works. It settles on the surface of the bees, it settles on the surface of the hive, and most importantly, settling on the physical surface of the bees. Why? Because that's where the varroa mite is. It's walking around on the bees. And the next thing we want those varroa mites to do, because varroa mites don't generally scoot all around the hive. They go from bee body to bee body to bee body, and that starts when they hatch out from a cell, when the bee hatches out. So what happens is that little varroa has these really soft, translucent feet that touch the oxalic acid crystals that are on the surface. And it has a chemical reaction, goes inside the little mite, and the poor little mite dies and falls down into your trays that you described here through the screens and so on. So the crystal is not harmful, and it does condensate near things. What if you wanted to clean it off? You can clean it off with regular water and a toothbrush if you want to. And but that's what kills the mites, the tiny crystals that settle on the surfaces inside the hive and on the bees. This does not kill the bees, but it kills the mites. That's why it works. That's why I use it. People ask me about a whole range of treatments for mites. Oxalic acid vaporization is the only thing I've used. Why? Because it works and my bees are surviving with it and thriving. They're booming. Again, we're going to talk about that later. But I use the ProVape. This is a really bad illustration of it. Has a little heating pot here, has a Teflon lid. The oxalic acid crystals go into the little pot that's preheated. And when it hits that, it goes into a sublimation, which means it turns it from a solid right to a gas, no liquid. Shoots right through this tube. That's why on all of my hives, I just have a little 1/4-inch hole that's drilled through the back of them so I can walk along behind each one. We put a damp cloth over the entrance in the front. We put this little 1/4-inch tube in through the back. We vaporize it, keep it closed up for 6 to 10 minutes, take the cover off. Those crystals have settled all over the interior surfaces, might start dying in the trays. And if you have weaver bees like these in here, the mites that you find have their little feet chewed off. Pretty cool. ProVape 110. It's expensive. But what's your time worth? My wife and I go through my entire apiary in one evening. Of course, we only have, as of now, 20 colonies, but we can get it all done in one evening. So, no, the gas goes everywhere. You don't have to, it goes up, it goes down, it goes sideways. You don't have to move things around and direct it. The bees fan it unknowingly and help you out. This is Steve Rich. Hi, Fred. Thank you for all you do for our hobby. My wife and I regularly watch, and we received a top bar hive 3 years ago from our daughter for Christmas on purchased package with the queen locally. Unfortunately, we did not recognize the impact of varroa mites and lost the first hive. If you're brand new and you don't know, varroa destructor mites are mites that parasitize the honeybee, specifically Apis mellifera. Now here's what's weird about the varroa mite. They're species specific. They're parasitic to the honeybee. So if they killed off all the honeybees, they've killed their host, and they would likewise die. What kind of parasite kills its host to the point where it would no longer exist itself if it was really that effective? So they attach themselves to the backs of bees, and we generally find them most frequently between the segments on the abdomen of the bees, feeding on the stored fats of those bees. So, makes the bees weak, brings disease. The disease gets spread. One of the most noted diseases that most commonly comes from the Varroa destructor mite would be deformed wing virus. Why is that terrible? Because the virus causes them to have deformed wings. They can't fly, they can't fulfill their duties, and it impacts the colony as a whole, plus spreads that virus around. So, they say their top bar hive is hard to manage. This spring we moved to 8-frame Langstroth deeps, 1 medium initially, and a Mann Lake Saskatraz package with queen, April 1st install. Saskatraz bees, I've been using those for 2 years now, highly productive. If you've got a flow hive and you're worried about your bees filling up those flow supers and flow frames, Saskatraz bees, super productive where I live. They do an incredible job. Anyway, because the cold winters in the mountains, I also look to Venofarm's input for cold climate beekeeping strategies. As I mentioned before, Venofarm, that's his thing. Insulating, super cold weather bee management. If you look at his icon, it looks like it has cherry tomatoes or something. Go check him out. Tell him Frederick Dunn says hi. Anyway, now for the question. Due to a strange spring summer here, we still feed 1-to-1 syrup. I added a medium super yesterday with a queen excluder. The brood looks great, but may be honey bound. I am considering moving some of the frames that are full of honey from the box to above the queen excluder and giving the queen more space for brood. Is this a good idea? Note, we have never disturbed, inspected this hive, but all indications are good. I did this drawing. If you had a deep brood box, and this is an 8-frame. By the way, 8-frame boxes, honeybee hives come in 8 or 10 frame sizes, and that means there are either 8 frames in it or there are 10 frames in there, and we always start with a deep brood box if you're in a colder climate. Now here's the thing, we're talking about cold weather beekeeping here. They have one deep 8. Now the 8s make it through winter equally for me. 8s or 10s, they get through winter just fine. What's the advantage of a 10 then? Extra frames of honey for you. Okay, back to this. Let's say there's 4 frames of brood, right? That means there would be 2 frames on either side out here that have capped honey. They want to know if they add another box here, because they're going to put in a queen excluder, in order to keep them from being honeybound. What's honeybound? Honeybound is when they put the nectar in so many cells the queen runs out of places to lay. You end up with a population reduction inside the hive, and you have a lot of honey and resources, but you don't have the population to consume it and continue the line. So we want to create more space. I agree with adding this next box up here. I would not put a queen excluder in there because they're already full down here on the 8 frame. We're thinking about cold weather. I like to have a minimum of 2 boxes going into winter of honey and resources for the bees. So I would not put the queen excluder in there. I would put the next box in there, and I would not transfer any of the frames from down here up into that box. I would let the bees use the bottom 2 boxes in any way they see fit. Now, if the queen in here on these brood frames has run out of space for her eggs, expect the brood to rise up into those boxes here. That is much more efficient for the bees to have brood going up between these 2 boxes, occupying these center 4 frames, than it is to have them spread their brood out to the width to the outside walls. So my advice is, don't pull frames, don't put the queen excluder in, add that next box, let the bees fill that up. It's immediate expansion. By the way, if bees are already on their way to being honeybound and you suspect they might make preparations to swarm if the population is really high, sometimes they won't draw out new cells. So it would be a time that you would want to put in pre-drawn cells if you have them in storage. If you don't have them in storage, the next best thing is Better Comb, BETTERCOMB, sold by Better Bee. It's pre-drawn and can provide immediate relief for bees that are finding places to put eggs for brood and looking for places to store nectar. I don't fill whole boxes with that stuff, but if you had 4 brood frames down below, I would put 4 Better Comb frames directly above those, and then the outer frames I would use Acorn heavy wax frames. That's what I would do. Then if they fill those 2 boxes, that's when the queen excluder goes in there, and that's when you start to get honey for yourselves after we've taken care of the bees to get them through winter. Next is green blue How do they get their jobs assigned to them, like the workers or the foragers? Okay, here's the thing. Their jobs aren't really assigned. They inherently, instinctively, naturally perform these functions. They're coded. They're pre-coded to do it. I'm just going to give you a quick rundown. What are the jobs inside the hive? What's going on in here? Anyway, first job, newly hatched. When do they hatch? 21st day, 22nd day, 21, 22, right there. First thing they hatch, they do cell cleaning. Now here's the other thing you'll hear people say all the time. As soon as that little baby bee hatches out of there, she just turns around and cleans her own cell. I have not seen a bee yet that hatches out of her cell, turns around, and goes right back in and cleans her cell, because the minute she's out of there, she scoots away somewhere, and the other nurse bees that are adjacent to the cell go right into cleaning. So I've never seen anyone clean their own cell. So, that's it. But that's the first job, cell cleaning. They may go clean somebody else's cell. I don't know, but I've never seen them clean their own. They also do the capping of brood. So when brood are about to go into their pupa state, the second job that young bees get is to produce that capping. These are pure bees that have never been outside. They've never been dirty. They are super clean. And so they should be the ones making the best wax in the hive, which is cap wax. Okay. So then they do that. And another job for a bee that's never been outside, they go into brood tending. What is brood tending? Well, developing brood. After 3 eggs as an egg, 3 days as an egg, the egg hatches, it becomes a larva. That larva puts out a pheromone, and a nurse bee zips in there and starts feeding it. That's it, tending to the brood, feeding it. They all start off on the same food mixture. They all get royal jelly. Somebody's going to say, only the queen gets royal jelly. The queen gets fed royal jelly throughout its development. All castes. There are 3 castes inside a hive. There are the drones, which are the male bees. There are the workers, which are the female bees. And then there's the queen. 3 castes. And what happens is the queen's going to get fed 2-3 times as often as a worker bee. But they all start off on royal jelly. After that, some of them shift to bee bread, which is what they get out of the pollen that's brought in there. So anyway, so they're tending brood, feeding them. And then the senior in-house worker bees become queen attendants. They follow her around. They constantly groom her. They feed the queen. They make sure nobody bothers the queen. There's always a wake. When the queen goes across the little board, there's a space behind them, and her little retinue of workers and queen attendants are with her all the time, ready to take care of her at any moment or encourage her to move on. They're also the ones that stop feeding her and start pushing her around when they're going to kick her out when there's going to be a swarm. Those are the in-house jobs. Next, senior in-house jobs. Now these jobs can overlap. They don't all, it's not like you're this for 5 days, then you do this. Then you're that for 4 more days, then you do that. Depending on the needs of the hive, there's a division of labor that, based on the demands of the hive, different workers inside may shift immediately to another job and not do this job for 10 days. On the flip side, under other circumstances, they may do that job exclusively for 10 days. So this is widely variable. So I'm sure that's super helpful. There are also bees that receive nectar as they get older. So the bees that come from outside, they zip in there, they've got nectar, they did their waggle dance, they told everybody where the nectar could be found, and then they go up to the next frame, and voila, there's a receiver bee there that sticks her tongue out and gets that nectar out of the honey crop from that foraging bee. So that's the next job, in-house jobs. Cleaning house, they clean the debris, they haul away dead bees, often called undertaker bees and things like that. They pack pollen. Another bee flies in with pollen on its legs, does this waggle dance, tells everybody how awesome the pollen is. They all get a taste of it. Then they run in and they scratch it off their hind legs and stick it right in the cell. And then other bees come along, these pollen packing bees, and they use glandular material from their mandibular glands, and they put a little honey in there and they make that pollen ferment. So they pack that in, another in-house job. Comb building. Senior job, in-house, last stage before they do any of the outdoor jobs. They're comb builders. So they have eight comb glands, wax glands on their abdomen, and they generate these little shingles of wax and they scratch them off. They have a little special spike on their hind leg that they skewer that wax and they bring it up forward to their front, and then they take that and they use their mandibles and they use their mandibular glands and they contribute material and their heads wobble like this. And they're wax workers. That is the last inside job. Outside jobs. They move on to the ventilating jobs, which happen inside. There are bees sitting and ventilating. Now here's the thing. Now it's 94 degrees in here. These bees are not troubled at all. They're not doing a lot of ventilating. They're perfectly content with a 94 degree temperature. Why is that? Because if it were any colder, they would increase it to 94 to 97 degrees to protect any eggs or larvae that has hatched out recently over the last week. I'm going to be looking at that. But that's actually a good temperature for them. So what's hot to us isn't to the bees. So ventilating also happens on the landing board. So they're outdoor, indoor, outdoor. They could be at the entrance. They could be on the landing board fanning away. I've never seen them fan air in. I've seen them fan air out. And air just naturally gets drawn back in while they're fanning out. Otherwise, it'd just be a huge vacuum and it would implode. Next is foraging. And then some of the longest lived bees. And I don't think every bee does this, by the way, and that's guarding. By the way, not every bee will do all of these jobs. Sometimes, depending on the needs of the colony, they bump somebody ahead. You're going to go right from receiving nectar to comb building. So it's, again, these are just jobs that happen. Exactly. Indoor jobs and outdoor jobs are pretty clear. But as far as exactly what day one starts doing one job and stops doing another, yeah, we just had a swarm out. So all those bees left. So obviously some of the younger bees are going to be pushed into foraging duties earlier. They're going to be doing ventilating earlier than they otherwise would because most of those outdoor bees have departed. So widely variable, that's it. Cell cleaning, capping brood, tending to the queen, receiving nectar, cleaning house, packing pollen, comb building, ventilating, guarding, foraging. Those are all coded. They have an inherent ability to do these things. It is what they do. Genetics play. Bees that have certain traits and behaviors can be genetically passed on, by the way. That's where you get these really hot hives, really defensive hives, and things like that. Those are genetic traits. You can modify what those bees will have by sticking with and reproducing colonies that have traits that you find favorable, right down to being nice to you when you visit the hive. Next is Ron Foltz. Fred, I've been thinking of making an observation hive. From seeing your experience, I think it would be a valuable tool for learning more about my bees. I imagine you will see things you probably wouldn't otherwise. I've seen some observation hives available commercially, but I think I'm going to build my own design. I'm not certain if I've ever told you. Anyway, likes my drawings. I want to tell you something about observation hives. Bees don't like them. These bees are in here because I put their eggs in there, and then I brought in a queen, and I put the queen in there, and they had no choice but to reside where I put them. This is the equivalent of a single 8-frame deep box as far as interior space goes. This is not a configuration that bees would choose. How do I know that? Because when this thing was completely empty, I collected a swarm of bees, and I wanted to find out if that swarm of bees, if I could get the scouts to check this out, then the swarm would just move in and they would claim it on their own. But guess what? I could not get them to do that. Even when collecting a swarm that's bivouacked on a branch, I took the branch, I put it right up against the outside of this building, right next to the entrance, which is 1.5 inches diameter, and I just knew with it being right there, those bees, the scouts in the cluster, would go right in there and explore it, and they'd tool all over inside here, and they'd tell everybody to go in, and I'd get this sweet video, and they'd all just move in on their own. Well, they didn't. Not only did they not want to move in here, the bees actively plugged the hole with bees, live bees, jammed it up. Because I came inside and I looked, the whole thing is covered in bees. None of them are going inside and investigating this. So the bees rejected it outright. So the only way I get bees to occupy an observation hive is to physically bring in frames of brood. And either I bring in queen cells that are ready to hatch, and I install them with those frames of brood, which I've done that before, so I can do a split and install them here. The other thing is I just take frames of brood, put nurse bees in here, and then I just fly in a weaver bee and install her, and that's why they occupy this hive. But basically, it's a swarm generator all year long. They build up, they swarm out. They build up, they swarm out. And that is natural varroa control also. So I just wanted to share that for those who are thinking about building an observation hive. It is not rare, even when it's in a nice warm building and they get fed all winter long, because there's a nature center near where I live, and the observation hive has, at times, died out completely through winter, even under the best care. It is not a perfect space for bees, but it does provide us an insight to what's going on with bees all over the place. The next question, Peter Zweck. Hi Fred, it's a few months in our spring before I get my first nuke to start my first colony, so I won't get into this situation for quite a while, but I'm wondering if and when a colony starts getting crowded, is it ever enough to just harvest some flow frames and honey? So here's the thing. We're about to hit a nectar flow here, and my bees have these abundant workforces dying to get out there and bring in all that nectar and load everything up. And you think you have a flow hive, so we have 6 flow frames or 7 flow frames, depending on which one you get. And one of the big advantages of that is, right now I have 4 flow supers that are 90% full. So they have to be, the honey has to be taken off this coming week. Because when the nectar flow hits, they're going to run out of space to put all the nectar. Nectar takes twice as much space when they first bring it in. They spread it out because even bees understand more surface area, quicker dehydration. And then what they do is they transfer that consolidated honey into very specific areas on the comb for your honey super. So it takes twice the space in the beginning, and then they dehydrate it down, they concentrate it in cells, and they fill that back up. So here's the thing, it looks like you would be able to do that, but in a massive nectar flow, here's what happens. All the flow supers fill up, chock-a-block. You can't draw it off yet. Why? Because it's not capped, it's not dehydrated, the water percentage is not below that critical 19%. So if it's higher than 19% water, there's a chance that honey could ferment, so now you have a problem. So we can't take it off yet. So could you put another flow super on top of that and let them fill 2 of them? Yes, you can. It's rare. Most people don't do it. Why? It's a lot of money for starters. But you can, and that's the problem. Even though that flow super is full, until those cells are capped with wax, you can't draw them off and have the proper percentage of water so that stuff will last. And I think the last one we took off already this year was at 17% water. So good to go. But like I said, we've got them full now. We're going to have to clear them off because we have a nectar flow coming on. So there's that. Next is Richard Kuhn. Great video, Frederick, as usual, but I am confused also, living in PA, that you noted that your big flow comes in mid-August. Ours is about gone. Now, people that are southern to me, warmer climates for me, probably already had the big nectar flow that's on its way here because of where I am in the northern part of the state. We're delayed. So our goldenrod is just now opening up. Goldenrod and asters are going to unload on us here. Plus, we still have lots of white clover. White clover carries them right through summer. And so that's coming up. That's where I am. So if you're south of me by any great distance, then you're probably warmer and you probably got these things earlier and you may be at the end of it. So there's that. And you stated that you should look into treatment regimen if you have mites. I understood that you did not use any kind of treatment for mites. Thanks for sharing. Okay, and Richard is right because in the past, I used treatment-free bees. That's why I chose the Weaver bees years ago. 2008 is when I think I put out my first bee YouTube. But I wanted to be treatment-free. I wanted to get the bees that were surviving on their own. I got survivor stock, Varroa-resistant stock, hygienic stock, and I kept those every single year, and I did not treat them. And then I thought, yay, every spring I'll take whatever survives and I'll split from those, and then I'll make more colonies, and then we'll get into winter and then recycle, and then eventually I'll have an entire apiary of untreated bees that can handle their own. Well, here are some of the problems with that. Let's forget the fact that I was losing 50% of my hives, 30 to 50% of my hives every year. And so the first part of spring, what we're doing is restoring what we've lost. The other thing is I have no control over people around me, other beekeepers in my area that are only just a couple miles away a lot. And we have new beekeepers that just moved across the road. So I have bees all over the place that may possibly be carrying mites and diseases associated with mites. You can have Varroa-resistant hygienic bees that are overwhelmed by mites by being adjacent to a colony of bees that is what's called a mite bomb. So last year, I decided in the spring of last year that instead of just letting the Darwinian method continue, because I'm not a bee breeder, I'm not a queen breeder, I just get the bees that I get and I take care of them through the year and I see how long I can keep them going. And I've never had a total die out. And so some bees always make it, but that just didn't seem good enough. And then I was listening to Randy Oliver talk and some other beekeepers that are of good reputation when it comes to managing bees. People in northern climates and stuff that said most of these die-offs are actually not because the bees aren't hardy enough to do it, but because they were dealing with Varroa loads that took them out. So then I decided, well, if that's true, maybe I should try a treatment and see what happens, see if there's any improvement or if they still die out. So now this might have just been a freak incident because I took oxalic acid vaporization. That's what I landed on, so I decided to use a soft acid treatment. And I treated in the spring last year and in the fall after the honey was taken off. And I had 14 out of 15 colonies get through winter. And that's the first time I've ever had that kind of survival rate. So everything else stayed the same. So my management practices didn't change. I did add the Saskatraz bees. In fact, the die-out was a Saskatraz bee. And the Weaver bees made it. Everybody made it. Everybody started out in spring. Too strong, to be honest. I had too many bees. That's how I ended up today with 20 colonies of bees because they're too healthy, they're doing well, they're reproducing, they're swarming, I'm catching their swarms, and so it goes. That is because I'm treating with oxalic acid vaporization. Randy Oliver made the point that if you are not going to treat your bees and they have Varroa, instead of letting them deal with the Varroa and suffer, just kill those bees. That made perfect sense to me. We're basically taking bees under our management, under our care. Once you find out they're loaded with Varroa, you have to do something about the Varroa or you have to get rid of those bees because if they're in the same apiary, those loaded with Varroa, just like I described early on, some number of bees are going to drift to other colonies. They may not physically have a Varroa on their body, but what they're carrying with them are many of the diseases that come with Varroa destructor mite. So it's not just the physical mite, they're spreading their diseases to other colonies. So if you treat those colonies in your apiary with oxalic acid or whatever it is that you decide to work with, you will relieve your bees of the mite loads physically and subsequently all of those diseases that come hand in hand with the Varroa mite because they're injecting that right into the body of the bees when they're feeding. So that's why I started to do that, but you're exactly right, Richard. I was treatment free for many years and I've never had so much success with my bees ever than when I started finally treating the colonies that had Varroa mites with oxalic acid vaporization. So that's what I do now. Next and the last question is from George Garcia. Thanks for another wonderful video. I do have a question regarding harvesting honey from comb built on acorn bee frames. The acorn frames come waxed, but if you scrape off capped honey off the frames, will there still be a coating of wax? I know the bees hate plastic frames that are not coated with wax, so I'm trying to avoid causing problems myself. Thank you. So the plastic frames, if you're scraping all of the comb off of your plastic foundation frames that come pre-waxed, my number one choice for pre-waxed frames right now is acorn. Years ago I was using Pureco, also heavy wax. The bees used them pretty well, but I did testing where I took all of the big sellers of waxed plastic frames, put them all in the same hives, put them all together in different hives, and I looked to see what the bees would draw at first. Acorn, clear winner. Always get the heavy waxed frames if you're going to use plastic foundation or plastic one-piece frames. They really draw it out great. So here's the thing. If you're scraping off the comb completely, you will never get all the beeswax out of the little divots and the embossing that's on that frame, which defines the frame size for the bees to draw out. So you don't have to worry about that. I would not scrape the plastic frame itself. We don't want to scrape bits of plastic into your wax or comb. So, skim the surface, draw it off, and always leave something behind, in my opinion. And I used a uncapping tool in one of my videos that was really good. So if you're the kind of person that doesn't want to extract by spinning, if you plan to do some kind of crush and strain method for deriving honey from your hive, then this uncapper that I'm going to put a link to is really good for that. You can take off all the comb. It does not scrape any of the plastic at the bottom. Then you put those out, let the bees clean them off, and then store them, and then you're going to use those as pre-wax frames for the future. So, things I want to warn you about. If you're in parts of the country that are just now going into a nectar flow, and based on what some of the other people said, your nectar flow is gone. But if you're where I am, you're about to get into a nectar flow, the populations of the bees are high. If your nectar flow is over and you still have this huge foraging force out there, robbing potential is high. I recommend that you have robbing screens on hand to stop it if it starts. Also, you want to make sure that your entrance reducers are sized right for the population of the colony that you have, because these foragers from super colonies, these really big ones, can get out there, and once a scout gets past the guards and they get in there and they get a hold of some of that honey and they get back out, they come back with hundreds of their hive mates, and they can rob out an entire colony of its winter reserves in a matter of hours. This is the time to be vigilant about robbing, making sure entrances are correctly sized so that the bees that inhabit those hives can defend them. What else do we have? Have your supers staged. If you're going into your big nectar flow now, have extra supers ready to add onto the boxes and add them ahead of time. Don't wait. If you've got a 10-frame box, 7 out of those 10 frames are now full of honey and brood and everything. Add another box right away. Give them that space to expand. If it's in an apiary that you don't get to very often, put extra boxes on now. You have nothing to lose by doing that. It's still hot. And then while you still have warmth, cut back. Also, you can visit my website. And don't forget, if you like what we're doing here, go ahead and subscribe. Hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for being here. I hope you have a fantastic weekend and that your bees are patient with you and don't go honey bound.